November 13th, 2024. This is episode 63 of the In a Nutshell podcast. I'm your host, Sean Vowells, and as usual, I'm joined by Joe Meade. Tonight, Joe and I will go over the Week 12 preview for Big Ten football. Now, not a ton of games, so we'll get through this a little bit quicker than we do normally. But, Joe, we're going to start, as we usually do in the Big Ten, on Friday night. UCLA, with some new life coming off a 3-game winning streak, goes up to former Pac-12 foe Washington, who also is looking to get to bowl eligibility. So, in the grand scheme of things, maybe this game doesn't mean the most, but whether these teams have a postseason game might ride on who is victorious in this one.
Yeah, Sean, especially if you look at it for Washington. Their last game is against Oregon at Oregon. And let's face it, Sean, I know a lot of Oregon's players are transfer players and whatnot. And, this is a different Washington team than the ones in 22 and 23. Washington ruined Oregon's season in 3 games over the last 2 years, whether it was the regular season loss in 22 or the 2 losses in 23. So, Washington, this is definitely your best chance to get to bowl eligibility at home on a Friday night, 6 o'clock local kick. Sean, this is fascinating to me because of Washington. Will Rogers was benched in the whiteout game, as we kind of alluded to yesterday. I don't think the game itself was on Will Rogers. I really think them missing that field goal allowed the tidal waves to open and consume them, which is exactly what happened. So I don't think Will Rogers should be faulted much for having his worst game of the year. With that said, Sean, I don't think this will affect him much. He's dealt with a lot of adversity, whether it's been at Mississippi State, even this year, going off losing multiple games in a row and then rebounding, whether it was the game against Michigan, whether it was after the tough game against Iowa. This is a kid that doesn't get phased a lot, so I don't think it's going to matter much. Now, in terms of UCLA, I don't think you could turn the ball over the same way you did against Iowa and get away with it, especially because that was a game at the Rose Bowl. And let's face it, Sean, Jedd Fisch, I trust him coordinating an offense with the Will Rogers, with Denzel Boston, Giles Jackson, Jonah Coleman, a lot more than Iowa's offense, where they still don't seem to have a permanent quarterback. So, Sean, this is a fascinating game. It's really going to come down to turnovers. I don't think it's going to be like 1-1 turnovers. I think it's going to be 3-2, whether that's fumbles, Ethan Garber's interceptions, untimely communication between Washington, because I do think UCLA can do a lot more, whether that's Garber's throwing, whether that's Harden running. And, UCLA really has nothing to lose. I mean, if they go 5-7, I think their fans would still probably be pretty happy based on what we saw in the first month of the season. This is a really hard game to predict, Sean. Washington's currently a 4-point favorite on most sports books. Sean, I'm going to pick UCLA. I just think they've been really hot. I picked them last week. They didn't let me down. So why should I not reward them and pick them again, especially in a game where, let's face it, Sean, uh, UCLA can really turn a lot of heads for a team that's going to have 5 losses. So
Yeah, I'm going to go Washington by 6. I just think they're really going to look in the mirror and say to themselves, all right, if we want to go to a bowl, we have to win this. We're not beating Oregon. Even though you get a week to prepare for that, you're not beating Oregon. So I think they, in front of their home fans, if you want, now, maybe some of them don't want to play in a bowl game, but if they do, they have to win this game. I'm going to say they win by 6, where they're winning for the whole game, and UCLA just can't quite to tie it up. Maybe a couple close calls or a couple possessions that could have gone either way. But I'm going to go with Washington with the victory here. But, Joe, it's hard to argue with the fact that UCLA might be the hottest team in the Big Ten, especially in terms of 2 road wins and then a home win against Iowa. All right, we'll turn the page to Saturday. We've got noon on BTN. Ohio State visits Northwestern on the road. Ohio State, slight favorites, only 28.5 points. This should be an easy one for them. If it's not, that'll be a problem.
yeah, Sean, a lot of people are going to think of the game at Ryan Field 2 years ago, the insane windstorm the first week of November of 22. I don't think this game's going to be anything like that at all weather-wise, especially because it's at Wrigley Field, where let's confront reality, Sean. This is going to be 60% Ohio State fans. I don't see many Northwestern fans that are let's say outside of Winnetka, Evanston, Wilmette, even in the city going to this game. So, yeah, Sean, Ohio State's about a 29-point favorite. That's about what I expected. I think in terms of Northwestern, the only way you can keep this competitive is if you hit some big plays in the air. I don't think you're going to be able to run out Ohio State and expect that's going to be successful to even like start a firefight versus them, let alone win a firefight. Uh, you're going to need turnovers, big plays in the air to Kurtz Henning, maybe some trickery, and even then, I still don't think this game's going to be close. For Ohio State, I think you want to continue to develop the deep passing game. I think Jeremiah Smith, again, he's an alien. He's a freak of nature. Can you get him going deep? We've seen a lot of plays where he's bailed Will Howard out, especially at Emeka Ibuka. Can you get guys like Jelani Thurman, Carnell Tate, Brandon Ennis? Can you get them even more consistent so when in the playoff you're against bigger and badder defensive backs where you're going to need those guys? I think Ohio State should develop some confidence and some plays for those guys. I think that's the main thing I'd be looking at for this game. I didn't give a score prediction for the last game, frankly, because I don't think it's relevant for Washington and UCLA. I see that game going 1,000 different ways. This one, I don't see going many ways. I think Ohio State wins this game 45-13. They cover the spread, and this game's never really all that fun or close. Unless it's fun if you're an Ohio State fan.
Yeah, and especially those Chicago-based Ohio State fans might not be able to see their team every year. This will be a neutral game, really, more than anything, and really every original Big Ten school. Now this goes back to before the last realignment. Forget Rutgers, forget Maryland. All the original Big Ten schools do have a pretty good alumni base in Chicago, so you expect nothing different from Ohio State here. I'm going 49-7 OSU. I think you can get your starters out of there quick and gear up for who you've got in Week 13. All right, Joe, up next we have got 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time on Fox Sports 1. Aiden Childs and the Michigan State Spartans go down to Champaign, Illinois to face Luke Altmaier and the Fighting Illini. Illinois, it's been a while since they've won a game, if we're being honest. They had the bye last week, and then they had Minnesota lost at home, and then the week before that they lost on the road at Oregon. The Michigan game, Joe, was their last victory. Now, if you look at the calendar, that's almost a month ago. So what was a really good season for Illinois here, you're hosting a Michigan State team where you're just 2.5-point favorites. So really interesting one here.
Yeah, this is a really interesting spread, but when you put it in context, maybe it's not so mysterious why that's the case, Sean. Michigan State's coming off a much-needed bye week. They were probably a really demoralizing loss against Michigan, and then a completely hopeless loss after the first quarter against Indiana when you lost by 37 on your home turf. So how do I think this game's going to play out? It's kind of like the first game we previewed, Sean. I see it going a lot of different ways. I'm really curious to see whether the second bye week for Michigan State, particularly for Aiden Childs, I do think he will play. I know he was banged up in the Indiana game. He did leave early, but I think after 2 weeks, a lot of our friends at Spartans Illustrated, particularly my friend Chase Glasser, are led to believe he will play. Outside of that, I don't see a way for them to win if Childs does not play. Sean, is he going to turn the ball over in this game? Brett Bielema is one of these guys who completely fools you. Now, in terms of traditional Big Ten defenses, I think Childs passed his first test, which was against Iowa. He turned the ball over once, and after that, he never looked back. Do I think he'll ace this one on the road? I'm more inclined to believe it'll be somewhere in the middle. I think he'll make a few mistakes, but nothing too catastrophic. What it's going to come down to is if Illinois' offense can be effective. They were completely ineffective against both Oregon and Minnesota. They went through long droughts. You can't do that against Michigan State because one thing I'll guarantee you is Aiden Childs, Nick Marsh, Montori Foster, Nate Carter, KLA. Those are five playmakers who at least one or two of them is going to make a huge play or two. So I think you could spot Michigan State for at least 17 to 20 points in this game. If they play really well, they could get to high 20s, low 30s. I think the magic number Illinois' offense has to accomplish is 24 to 27 points. Do I think they do that? I think they get some help from the defense, and ultimately I think Illinois wins a really entertaining game, 27-20, to 22. I think Michigan State, the story of the game is going to be them settling for field goals similar to the Michigan game. And I do think they might have to take a chance or two to win this against Illinois on the road.
And Joe, we're coming both teams off of a bye and then multiple game losing streaks before that bye. So do we see a rejuvenated, sharp effort from these offenses, or do we see a little rusty, uncertain, up and down game? And whichever team is able to lock in quicker, I think will win this. Might be ugly early, probably a bunch of 3-and-outs, but I think whoever locks in first will probably win this game. And I think it's got to be Illinois. I mean, Bielema has really made quarterbacks who have little experience really struggle in the past, and I don't see anything different here. I'm going 33-24 Illinois, but Michigan State does have that upside that you really just have to respect, that maybe they hit a couple big plays and maybe they get a couple big turnovers, and they certainly could win this game. If Illinois is who we think they are, I think they get the job done here. All right, Joe, 3:30 p.m. on CBS. How did this team get this slot? Penn State goes on the road to West Lafayette to play 1-8 Purdue. It was tough last week for Purdue against a really good team in Ohio State, and then they bring in Penn State here. Penn State, like you said, can't lose, or they're out of the college football playoff. I think that's pretty certain at this point. But they're favored by more than 4 touchdowns as well. So Penn State on the road at Purdue.
Sean, all I'm going to say is if Purdue somehow finds a way to win this, the spoiler makers fully needs to be studied. Iowa, when they pull upsets like this, even when they're bad, makes total sense because of the defense. If this happens, I would genuinely be speechless and might have to be locked in my room for the rest of Saturday to even think of a theory, because there's no way Purdue's going to win this game. Sean, whether it's Brown, Card, whoever, Penn State's defense is going to get home. Abdul Carter, I don't think quarterbacks are going to have 2 seconds to make a throw. So Penn State, for you, I think you need to get this passing game even more confidence. This is the team to do it against the worst team in the conference. Especially because I really think that game at Minnesota is going to be challenging. I know this is going to be played back on repeat, particularly for some of our listeners who are Penn State fans who will be certain to shoot me an IM. I know for sure if Penn State blows out Minnesota. But no, Sean, I think the combo of Singleton Allen is going to be too much, and I bet you these starters are out of the game by halftime. I don't think Penn State might not cover, but it's certainly not going to be anything to write home about. Give me Penn State to win this one, a very underwhelming 38-13. I think Purdue shows some signs of life, but in actuality, this game's over by halftime.
I'm trying to think, Joe. Ohio State beat Purdue 45-0. I have to go back and look, but I think my prediction was either 49-0 or 49-7 or something like that. But I'm going exactly the same score as last week for Purdue. Penn State 45, Purdue 0. I think Penn State will take some pride defensively in trying to keep them off the board, and it clearly can be done by a team that you want to chase. So I think Penn State will shut them out 45-0. If that game is anywhere close at halftime, that's not a good sign for Penn State. All right, 4 o'clock Eastern time on Fox. This is another interesting one. We've got Dylan Raiola and Nebraska going on the road to play a new quarterback in Jaden Maeva at USC. Both these teams had high expectations coming into the season. The Cornhuskers at 5-4, USC at 4-5. Bowl eligibility still on the line for these teams, but Joe, this game is sort of a meeting of two teams that have massively underwhelmed this year.
Yeah, Sean, and 2 teams similar to the Michigan State-Illinois game, desperate for a win because of the cold streaks they've been on. USC, outside of the Rutgers win, ever since Michigan, that Michigan loss has just been a disaster. And Nebraska, ever since that, let's call it what it is, that was just a beat down by Indiana when they played them. Ever since then, they've been on that skid. So what do I think happens in this game, Sean? I think USC kind of takes care of business the way they did against Rutgers. I think Maeva is going to be given a lot of easy throws. I do think USC's defense is got a lot of problems, but it's clearly improved from last year. I do think they make enough tackles in this one to keep Nebraska's big plays fairly limited. I think they confuse Rayola a lot, and quite frankly, Sean, I just don't think Nebraska is very good. And USC, although they are 4-5, I think Joel Klatt even compared them to 2022 Texas, not in terms of record, but more in terms of the talent and the potential they have. I do think it comes together at some point in this game, and USC probably wins a comfortable, let's call it a 35-21 type game.
Yeah, and Nebraska does have a chance here to sort of give their season a little bit of a second wind. You have USC, Wisconsin, and Iowa, good teams that you think Nebraska should be able to compete with and maybe beat. And then in terms of USC, Joe, it's a new era, really. I mean, Miller Moss is in the transfer portal. He's gone. And Jaden Maeva is playing for a spot next year. And we've seen interesting performances from players really in all sports. When they come into their starting role late in the year, they play well and are given that role the next year. For USC, you've got Nebraska, UCLA, and Notre Dame. If you win this one, you'd like to think you'd have a chance to get to bowl eligibility, and if you get to bowl eligibility and then you get a chance to beat Notre Dame and knock them out of the playoff, that could be a storyline to look out for. So still, a lot on the line for these two teams who maybe the most optimistic of fans thought college football playoff was in the cards, especially for USC. But at this point, you're just going to have to sort of backdoor your way into a bowl. I do think USC wins this one. I'm going a little bit lower scoring. I just think it might be a little uglier and where a turnover might be the difference. I'm going USC 24-21. All right, Joe, we've got two more games here, 6 o'clock Eastern on FS1. We've got Rutgers on the road at Maryland, two teams that have been struggling big time. Rutgers coming off a big win. Can they clinch bowl eligibility on the road against an underwhelming Maryland team?
I think they can, Sean. I'm pretty shocked Maryland's favored by 5.5.
That's a lot. It's a lot.
I think that's a lot. I think they've been dismal in Big Ten play. Their 1-5 record should really say it all. When we do the power rankings at the end of the year, I don't see how they're anywhere not 16-18. I think Billy Edwards Jr. is a phenomenal player. I just don't think the supporting staff does him justice.
He really is a good quarterback. And
yeah, he's great.
It's really it stinks for the rest of Maryland because a lot of teams could use a Billy Edwards type quarterback in this conference, and it stinks that the rest of the team isn't doing him any favors.
Yeah, I think Roman Hemby, Ty Felton are two great players, but that's it. It's kind of a 3-horse system, and you shut down one of the pieces, particularly the passing game. Then you're reliant too much on one player. And Maryland's played well in some of these games, but the defense isn't necessarily a blanket, and they'll let them down too. I'm not sure Kyle Monangai is going to play. I know Rutgers lost their starting DN for the year as well. I see this game being pretty ugly, Sean. I think there's going to be a lot of mistakes. Ultimately, though, I think Anthony Kalikmanis showed me a lot last week. And I think Rutgers' offense has taken a new step as well as their defense. And frankly, I trust Greg Schiano coach teams in games like this a lot more than Mike Locksley coach teams. Give me Rutgers to win a very ugly 26-24 game. I think that over-under of 51.5 is on the spot. And I do not think Maryland is going to win, quite frankly. I don't even know why it's 5.5, to be honest with you.
Yep, give me Rutgers 21-18, game-winning field goal at the end of the day. And still, Maryland has 4 wins. They've got Iowa, Rutgers left. There's a way that they could get to 6 wins. It starts with a win here, though. You're not going to beat Penn State. So they could backdoor their way into a bowl. And Rutgers, Joe, you'd have to think that they were really a solid team until they were a horrible team, and now they are. Did they get over a hump by beating Minnesota there? They've got Illinois, Michigan State, and Maryland. You got 1 win from those 3. So if you can get, all you need is 1 win to go bowling, and I think they get one here. Not sure. I think they should be favored if we're being honest. I think they've proven more than Maryland has, even though it's at Maryland's place. All right, 7:30, Big Ten Saturday night. Oregon goes on the road to Wisconsin. Dylan Gabriel and the number 1 ranked Ducks head into Wisconsin as Wisconsin has 5 wins. They're looking for win number 6. They will have 2 more chances after this one. But Joe, Oregon just 14-point favorites here. Should one of the tighter games where a top seed has gone on the road this year, and matchup predictors only giving them a 75% chance to win. That's certainly lower than anyone would have expected. But Oregon on the road here, you've teased this one as a potential banana peel for a while now. What's going to happen here?
I think it is a big potential for a banana peel, Sean. I think a lot of older Big Ten fans, or maybe semi-old Big Ten fans like myself, remember the #1 Ohio State Buckeyes in 2010 going into a night game in Madison and getting run out of the building, quite literally. Now, clearly a different regime. That was Bielema, that was Tressel. This is Fickle and Dan Lanning. 2 names. Actually, Fickle in 2010 you would have heard of, but Dan Lanning, I promise you no one in 2010 knew that name. So clearly an irrelevant argument. But you can't shake things like that, Sean. Night games in Madison have been challenging. I think Penn State had one of their biggest challenges of the year there. I think the late pick six really blew that game out of the water and didn't make people appreciate how close of a game that truly was. So Wisconsin has the ability to stay in this game. I think the crowd's going to spur them on. I do think Braden Locke protecting the ball is going to be paramount. I don't think Wisconsin can survive if they lose the turnover battle, even by 1, let alone multiple turnovers. So I think that's the biggest key for Wisconsin competing. Now, Oregon, they've showed some vulnerability in the pass defense, and I say some because when you get Jordan Birch back, when you have their pass rush, it's going to be really hard to consistently move the ball in the air on this team because of their ability to get home. And Wisconsin's defensive line in this one, let's face it, Sean, has a significant disadvantage. Whether it's Jordan James running, if that doesn't work, they're not going to be afraid to jet sweep it to a Stewart, a Tez, a Dylan Gabriel, even on a QB keep. So I think ultimately in this one, there's too many ways for Oregon to win and too few ways for Wisconsin to compete. I do think this game is close through 3 quarters. I think Oregon's talent at the end of the day is going to prevail through. And this might be similar to the game in Ann Arbor, where a few mistakes end up costing Wisconsin a chance to be in it at the end. Give me the Ducks in this one to win 37-24. I don't think they cover, but I do think they pull away at the end, and Wisconsin probably looks back at a few plays and thinks of what could have been.
I got 38-21 Oregon. There is a little bit of Oregon hasn't, other than the Big House, they haven't really played a tough road game yet. Oregon State on the road game, UCLA on the road early in the year, and then Purdue and Michigan. Those are the 4 road games they've played. And certainly 3 bad teams that they've played on the road, and then whatever you want to call Michigan, a good team, an okay team. They really haven't. I think Wisconsin's probably the best team that they've played on the road this year. Maybe if they're equal to Michigan, something around that. But maybe that can be an angle that people can take. But really, that's it. I mean, you got to do a lot of mental gymnastics to talk yourself into this being just a football game, let alone a Wisconsin victory. So I could see it, being 13-10, 17-13, something like that at halftime. But I do think Oregon will. I think the game will be over by the end of the third quarter, and after that, it'll just be take care of the ball and wait for those 000s. So, Joe, that's all the games that we have in Week 12 in the Big Ten. We have got 2 more weeks after that. We've got college football rankings coming in every week. And then some point between either before the Big Ten championship game or right after, we'll do our power rankings, probably our final ones, maybe later in January. We'll see what happens there. But the next edition of Power Rankings will come after the regular season is over. So that is it. That's all we have for you today. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.